Figure Plus Club. Welcome to the Six Figure Plus Club. I'm Kelly Martins, your host, and today I'm joined by Bec Cuzzillo. Bec is a spiritual business coach who helps women create consistent income and grow sustainable businesses that honor their values, their spirituality, and the season of life that they're in. She's been in business for more than 10 years and has supported hundreds of women in building and scaling their businesses. And what really stood out to me about Bec's story is that one of her biggest periods of growth actually happened after becoming a mother. Instead of stepping back from her business, she reimagined it. She simplified her offers, got crystal clear on her vision, and built a business that supported both her family and her goals. All the way from Australia, Bec, welcome. I'd love to start by having you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, about your business, and how you found your way into this work.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for having me. I started my business 10 years ago now. And at the time, I was still working part-time. So I was working 4 days a week, or maybe I was working full-time and then I went down to part-time. That's probably what happened. But I actually started my business making candles, which sounds like a whole nother side quest. And it kind of was. I made candles. I was at the time, I trained as a Reiki healer. And I needed an outlet from my day job. So I was just really looking for some kind of creative outlet, something that I could do on the side that I would enjoy. The work that I was doing, I was in the community sector doing work with young people, lots of social justice issues, lots of things like that. And I was really needing something that was a little bit lighter for myself. And so I started this business on the side, not really knowing what it would become. And very quickly, I realized that I really loved the work that I was doing. I was making these candles. And as I started doing that and exploring different bits and pieces, I created this range of candles that was inspired by goddesses. So behind me here, I have my beautiful artwork. Yeah. This is one of the goddess artworks that I had done originally for my goddess range of candles. And so I launched these candles, and to celebrate that launch, I ran a women's workshop. And I had this moment sitting in this circle of women where I was like, wow, this is it. This is the work that I really want to do. And it kind of snowballed from there. So as I started doing more of that work, I then trained as a life coach. When I then decided, you know what, I'm going to go all in on my business, I was about 18 months in at that point. I went all in on the coaching side of things, went full time. And as I was doing that work with women, I then realized quite quickly that a lot of people, once they do that inner work, they're like, oh, I want to go and help others do this too. And so they would go and train as whatever they wanted to train as. And then they'd come to me and be like, Bec, you've been running this online business for a little while. How do I do it? What do I need to do? And so I started getting questions like that, started helping women with their businesses, and then the rest is history. But that's how I ended up in this very winding path where I am now.
I love that. Our stories are a little bit similar there. Where I actually started my entrepreneurship journey with an online e-commerce store, and it grew really quick, and everyone started asking me like, hey, how'd you do that? And it just organically turned into consulting and what I do now. So I feel like there's something to be said for when life throws things at you and you just follow the nudges.
100%. I always say follow those breadcrumbs. There'll be those moments that you have where you're like, oh, this is interesting. Or someone will ask you a question and it's like, oh, I like doing that. And then suddenly you're doing the thing and you're like, how did I end up here?
Yeah. So I'd love to talk about, you've been in business for 10 years. Congratulations. That's a huge milestone. I'd love to talk though about the early years of entrepreneurship and what that looked like for you. And then once you realized, okay, I'm going to quit my job, what was that moment like? What were the feelings like? What was the emotions going on? Because I know for me, when I quit my job, there was a lot of fear, right? There's the fear, there's the imposter syndrome, there's all these emotions that come up. So I'd love to hear from you about what came up for you and how you worked through all of that.
Mm. So I was about 18 months in when I decided that I would quit my job. And I remember, so I was very, very lucky in that I was in a job that was quite flexible anyway. And so I was given permission to drop down to 4 days a week, which I did. So I kind of had this transition where I could kind of slowly ease into things. And I went overseas to Bali on a retreat where I was actually supporting the retreat hosts. I was the photographer. I've had a few different side quests in my business years, but I was the photographer on this retreat and got to experience the beautiful retreat as well. And I remember going, before I went, I got permission that I could drop down to 3 days a week, which was great. I was like, amazing, I'll have this extra time in the business. And then I got on this retreat and I was just like, you know what? I don't want to go back. Like, I think I'm done. And that moment was quite a big moment of like, okay, well, how can I make this work? Is it going to work? Oh my goodness. But because I kind of eased into it, I also had this feeling of like, no, I know that this is going to be a thing, but also I feel like something that always sticks with me is my mum said to me, you want to burn the lifeboats, but not the bridges. So when I
Mhm.
left that workplace, I did a little bit of consulting work with them post that. And so I had this little bit of a lifeline, I suppose, which I felt
Mhm.
like, you know what, I'm going to give this thing a go, but I'm not going to burn those bridges. And the worst case scenario is that I have to go and get a job again.
Right.
And I and I felt like I could do that. Like that wouldn't be that terrible and it also wouldn't be that hard. But if I don't give this business thing a go, then I'm always going to be wondering what if I
Right.
did do it. So I feel like I had that fear, but I also had a few pans on the go. And so I had a few things that I knew I could fall back on, but also I just knew that I had to do it. And if I didn't do it, I would regret it more than uh, not doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. I felt the same way about my journey. It's so funny how when you get a nudge to do something in life and you follow it, how like all of these doors just kind of magically open for you, right? It's like you take the risk, you take the leap, and the universe or whatever it is that you believe in essentially catches you.
I
So
remember too that first week, I think, after I'd made that decision and handed in my resignation, I think I got 4 different emails with different opportunities. And I just had this moment of being like, oh, okay, even if these things don't pan out, it's kind of this sign that, yeah, I'm in the right
you're
place.
good.
This is
Yeah, you're
this is the
good.
right move.
Yeah. I love that. So it sounds like, you mentioned you had a few different ventures going on as you built your business. And then you had also talked about how, or you haven't talked about yet, but I want to hear about how you becoming a mom kind of helped you streamline and zone in on the work that you actually wanted to do and want to do today. So can you talk about how those transitions happened and when you had those realizations?
Yeah. So I became a mum about 4 years into my business journey. So I'd been doing a lot of things at that point. And when I look back, it was kind of wild how much I was doing. So I still had the candle side of the business that I was running. I was running women's workshops, women's circles. I was doing online coaching. I had a community. I was creating online courses. I was running my first programs. Like I was doing so many different things. And then I did have a couple of these side quests going on where I was doing some social media management over here. I was doing some photography over here. And then when I fell pregnant, I think is probably the moment where I realized things are going to have to change. And I also didn't know what that would look like. So I didn't really make a huge amount of decisions in the lead up to that. A lot of the change happened after I had my first baby. So he's turning 7 this year, which is wild. So I always think of my business as like pre baby and then post baby because everything kind of changed after that. So once I had him, I had kind of paused most things. So I was still doing the candles and the products. And so I still had my online shop going, and I knew that I could pack orders and do that kind of thing during my maternity leave, but I had put on pause all of my service side of the business. And so as I was coming back to that, I was thinking about, okay, well, what do I want this to look like? I had a few different online courses, as I said, and a couple of online programs. And at this stage, I was still very much doing life coaching and a little bit of business coaching. So I hadn't quite streamlined things in that way yet. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table. He was about 6 weeks old at this point, and I got an email from a business coach who I had been following for a while. And it was about her new mastermind. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this decision and I'm going to invest in a marketing and business coach and get some help here because I know that things need to change. So I joined that. And I remember I sent her off this email being like, hey, so I'm in this position where I'm like 6 weeks postpartum. I'm not really sure what things are going to look like yet. I don't really know when I'm going to go back to work. I don't really know what I'm going to do. Is this really the right time for me to join? And she was like, look, this is potentially a great time for you to kind of put some building blocks in. And then when you are ready to return to work, you'll be set up and ready to go. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. Spent the most amount of money I'd ever spent on my business, which was huge at the time. And I kind of just felt a little bit insane, but also, again, just following those nudges. And what I find so funny, and I always joke, I'm still very good friends with this coach, is that I did not just chill and kind of build things in the background. I think I launched an online program within 5 or 6 weeks of being in the program, and was, I had my first 5-figure launch, which was insane to me at the time. But I knew that that's what I needed to do because I just had this if I kept going the way that I was going, it just wasn't going to be sustainable, because doing all of those things that I was doing were great and I was making money, but it was very up and down. And when I could finally see this vision of like, okay, I'm going to go into online programs, I'm going to do this scaled version of my business where I can impact more women with the time that I've got, it kind of all those things fell into place. So that was the moment for me, I think, that really everything clicked.
So what does the simplifying look like? So tell us what your offers were. I know you had the candles and the other things going on, but what your offers were and what they are now.
Yeah. So now I have one program and I work with women in one way. And that year following having my first baby, I built out quite a few different programs. So I had the program that I ran that first time. From there, that was 6 weeks. From there, I then launched a 6-month program. And so I launched that. Following that, invited the women who'd come through that experience with me into this longer term program. And then that was still life coaching. And that was early 2020. And when COVID happened, I had a huge community of spiritual women who had their own businesses. And yes, I was doing a little bit of that business coaching work. But when COVID happened, a lot of the women in my world were brick and mortar, face-to-face businesses. And they had this moment of like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? And so I ran this little 3-week program called Move Your Business Online. And I'd been doing this for 4.5 years at this point. At that time, I used to have to explain what Zoom was to people. Like, people weren't video conferencing, and suddenly Zoom exploded as everybody finally knew what this thing was. So I ran this 3-week program, supported them to move their business online. From there, I then launched a 4-month business program, which was very much about putting those foundations in place for your online business. And then from there, I launched a 6-month program, which is actually what I have today. So I launched my program, The Spiritual Business Mistress Mind, for the first time at the end of 2020. And that was a mastermind designed for people who had their online businesses and really then wanted to grow and scale. And so I built all of these little things out as I went over that year. and then kind of landed in this place where I was like, okay, I really love this business coaching work. I'm going to put a lot of that life coaching stuff to the side. And I then had these two different programs. So I would run the one which would support people to build out the foundations, and then I'd run the mastermind. And as I've grown and developed over the last 7 years, I've built out other bits and pieces. And now I've evolved the Mistress Mind into what it is today. So I run a group mastermind. I have two different tiers in that. And I support women who are really wanting to create consistent cash and then scale their business. And so really that first year of being a mum was this huge evolution of my business. I think I created 6 or 7 different offerings and then finally landed on the one thing.
So talk to me about the mindset shifts that happened throughout all of that, right? So you became a mom. I'm sure you were dealing with everything that comes about after having a child, and then you're trying to figure out your business. I'm sure that there was a lot of ups and downs and emotions. Do you have any tools in your back pocket, things that you do that kind of center you and ground you that maybe some of our listeners might find helpful if they're in a similar situation?
That's such a great question. So I will preface this by saying my first baby was a bit of a unicorn when it came to sleeping. So I did not have the insane sleep deprivation that most young mums have. So he slept very well from very early. And so that allowed me to do a lot. So if anyone is listening to this being like, this woman sounds absolutely insane, like how did she do that? Or what support did she have? You know, I just want to preface it by saying that he was very, very good with sleep. And so I was not in this sleep deprived haze. I cannot say the same for my second 2 children, but I can say that that was the case for the first one. And I did have some support. So from about 5 months old, I had 1 day a week that my mum was looking after him. So I had 1 day to work on my business. So I wasn't kind of juggling absolutely everything all the time. And I think that's important for people to know, because if you don't have that support as a mum in those early stages, it can be like, how do you find the time to do anything, especially if you aren't having any sleep? So I will say that. But in terms of my like evolving the business so quickly and scaling so quickly, I think the thing that really supported me was having someone to talk to. So having that coaching support throughout that time was just so key, because I was really flying by the seat of my pants a lot of the time. And I really needed someone to kind of bounce off and be like, okay, this is what I'm thinking, or this is what's coming up for me. And just having that person, and it doesn't have to be a coach, of course, it can be someone else in your life, but having someone who you can talk to and have as that person, not just for business strategy, but also just being like, you know, I remember the biggest thing for me in that season was imposter syndrome. And I don't really relate to that a lot anymore. But at that time, I was like, who am I to be doing this? Especially when I was kind of shifting gears and going into more of that business coaching space. It was like, do I have enough to offer these people? Am I really in a position right now to share this knowledge? And I remember someone saying to me, you just have to be a few steps ahead of people in order to give them that support and support them to put those building blocks into place. And so I really just anchored into this belief that I knew enough and that what I had to offer was enough. And as I started getting that evidence, and I think this is something that I really encourage my clients to do, is to build that bank of evidence that you can look at. So I would get messages from clients and I would screenshot them and save them in my phone, and I would ask for testimonials and ask for feedback. And when I started seeing, okay, no, I do actually know how to support people to get results here, or to create what it is that they want to create, that's when I started feeling a little bit more confident and being able to have that conversation with myself. And as my background as a life coach, I was first a mindset coach. So I'm trained in NLP. So I have some of those techniques where I can really catch those thoughts as they're happening. And then rather than buying into the truth of them, stepping away from them, really examining them and going, okay, is that thought that I'm having that I don't know enough here actually true? Am I able to actually look at that and go, well, no, I've got this evidence over here that says I do know enough. And I've got this evidence over here that says I'm good at this work. And so being able to have that coaching conversation with yourself, I think, is such an incredible skill to have. And the first thing you need to do is become aware of what those thoughts are so that you can challenge them.
That's so true. And I love what you said too about kind of just diving in, starting, right? So it's like you have this imposter syndrome, you feel like you're a few steps ahead of people, but you're just doing it, right? And the more you dive into the work that you're doing, the more you learn and the more confident you become. So I love that you said that because I know that there's a lot of people out there that deal with imposter syndrome, especially when they're just starting out. I feel like everybody has that thought, like, well, who am I? What do I know? But we all just have to start, right? It's just getting out there and repeat, repeat, repeat until we build that confidence, right?
Yeah. And I think if you're being called to this work, I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think you do have something to share. If you're feeling like, I want to do this, it's like, okay, follow that desire, trust that desire within yourself. I think that's where something that I teach and work with is trusting your intuition and being able to discern what's fear and what's intuition, and
Mm.
knowing that that excitement or that desire that you have is your intuition guiding you to what you want to do, and that voice that's trying to talk you out of it, that's the voice that we need to identify and be able to coach ourselves through.
So, what are some tips or tricks that you can share with the listeners for when fear does show up?
So something that I really like to do, and it sounds counterintuitive, but I really like to actually have a conversation with that fear or entertain the fear for a moment. Usually, the biggest fear that comes up for my clients is if they're launching a program or launching something, selling something, and they're like, well, what happens if no one signs up? And I'm like, well, what if no one signs up? Like, let's actually go there. Like, if no one signs up, what happens? And they're like, oh, well, I won't sell anything. I'm like, yeah, okay. It's disappointing, right? It's not like it's not disappointing, but it's also not the end of the world. It's not the end of your business. It's not even the end of that offer. It gives us information that we can then examine and look at and, work out, okay, well, what is the right next step here? But at the end of the day, the worst case scenario is probably not that bad. And I think our fear makes it seem that way. And what we do is we try to ignore it usually. We try and put all of these positive affirmations over the top of the fear. And I am here for affirmations. And I think anchoring into beliefs and all of that is really, really powerful. But I think if we're not addressing the fear, it just sits in the back of our mind and can kind of be this monkey brain that we kind of keep going over without really looking at it. So I really encourage you to actually have a conversation with it or entertain that idea for a moment. Look at what that fear is, even do a bit of a fear inventory. This is something that my coach has taught me in the past. Write down what all of those fears are. Like, what are you actually afraid of here? What is the worst case scenario? What is that fear? And then actually be able to look at it and go, okay, well, some of these stuff is actually ridiculous. Some of the fears we have, they don't really matter, but it's just those thoughts. And when they're in our brain, they feel so much more important. And when they're down on paper, it's like, oh no, actually, I can see how that's not true, or I can see why that's not really important. A lot of those fears can be around what other people think of us. And so
Yeah.
it's like, let's look at that. Okay, well, what if that person thinks that? We need to start to be able to just let go of some of those things that we don't have control over. And then those things that we do have control over, it's like, okay, well, what can we do here? And so that's what I encourage people to do. Like, actually go there. Let's look at the fear. Let's examine it. And then we can actually put it to bed, because then we can be like, okay, what if we were successful? What if, in fact, going after this thing that you really want actually works? Because that is also just as likely as this what if over here.
That's very true. I love that. Something that works for me is I'm a big fan of journaling. I know some people like to meditate. I know some people like to do EFT, all these tools, but I'm a big fan of journaling and sitting with my fears. More or less what you just said, just writing it down really and just addressing, all right, why is this coming up for me? What is the real issue here? And you're right, you really do realize that like 90% of the time, it's really not that big of a deal, right?
Yeah. And you can create that safety for yourself then too, right? Because it's like, okay, well, if you don't make any sales in this launch, then we can address that. There's something you can do. And I think that's the best part about being a business owner, right? Like if you fail with something, it's like, okay, that's great feedback. Now I get to pick up and try again. And what does that trying again look like? And I love this conversation with clients so much because they'll come back and they'll be like, "Oh, well, there are all of these options if I don't make those sales." And I'm like, "I know. There's always options. There's so many options. We don't have to decide which options we're going with, but actually it allows us to then go when we have that thought of like, well, what if I make no sales? It's like, well, if I make no sales, then I've got these options. So that's not even a fear anymore because it feels like it's the end then, but it's
Yeah.
not actually the end.
I love that too, because at some point in your business journey, you're not going to get something right. You're going to have a hiccup. There's a lot of ups and downs, ebbs and flows, and learning curves when it comes to owning a business. So being able to really sit with that fear and look at it in a different way, I think is so important.
Yeah. And it's okay to be disappointed.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean that it's the end.
Yeah. We're not packing our bags. We just need to shift gears a little bit and figure out the best next step.
Exactly.
So I'd love to chat a little bit about what it's like for you as a mom and a business owner. How do you navigate both of those things? Because there are people out there that think you can't do both, but clearly you're doing it and you're doing it successfully. So I'd love to hear your insight on that.
That is a great question. I feel like I would answer this very differently at different times in my mothering journey. And right now I've got almost 7-year-old, an almost 4-year-old, and a 9-month-old, almost 10-month-old. So I'm very much in the baby stage at the moment, and he is wonderful, but I am full time with him. So he's at home with me Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, all day, every day. And so I'm very much working in the cracks of nap times at the moment, or after the kids go to bed, or if my husband's home, then I get to pop into my office and get a little bit of work done. And I often will do that. He'll walk in the door and I'm like, I've got a few things I need to do. See you later. So the biggest thing for me is really leaning into support. So the way that I'm able to do that is I very gratefully have my parents close by. My dad is retired, and so he will come over. I'll say, "Hey Dad, I've got a call at 12. Can you come over?" And he'll be like, "I'll be there at 11:45." And so I'm able to do my calls. Previously to that, my second child, I used to run my calls with him in the high chair next to me, and I would feed him snacks. And I think this is the thing about running your business as a mum with little kids is kids are so different. Babies are so different. I couldn't do that with my current baby. He is the loudest, noisiest eater ever. Like he just sits there and yells and throws stuff, and it's quite a whole experience. So I've had to really adapt to what that has to look like. And it's not easy. I remember towards the end of last year, as he was kind of becoming a little bit more aware, when he was really little and I was running calls, I would, breastfeed him, have him with me, he would sleep on me, and I could do my calls. But then as he starts getting more aware, that's not possible anymore. And I had this moment where I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to run my calls with my clients? I'm going to have to ask for support, ask for help. And I think that has probably been one of the biggest lessons in this season of my motherhood, has been just actually asking for more help than I feel comfortable asking for.
Mm.
So that's been huge. So it's definitely evolved over time, and my business has evolved as well. And when I took maternity leave for my second, I had 2 months off. I paused everything in the business for 2 months and I pre-sold my program. So I knew that I was coming back to clients after that. And then when I came back, I did launch again as well. And when I had my third, I was like, okay, I don't want to do it in that same way. I wanted to have 3 months off this time. And he was born in August. And so 3 months off was kind of this like really awkward time in the year where I was like, well, if I'm coming back and I put everyone on pause, I'm going to be coming back in mid-November and then it's the end of the year. And then it's like, maybe I should just have the whole rest of the year off and then come back in January. But then that was a huge amount of time to have off for my clients who I have lots of clients, very gratefully, who work with me for a really long time. And so I've had clients who've worked with me through both of these maternity leaves that I've had. So I worked out a way to have 3 months off, and I actually didn't put the program on pause. I brought in a support coach to support my clients through that time, and then came back 3 months after and was able to just jump straight back into it. But I've set the business up in a way that doesn't mean that I have to be on calls all the time. So I have maybe 2 to 3 hours of calls every week. And so I get support in for that time. And then the rest of my business can basically be run from my phone. And so all of the in between support that I do is me on my phone. Sometimes I do it while I'm out on a walk, pushing the baby in the pram. Sometimes I do it while he's sleeping on me. Sometimes I do it, when the kids are playing in the backyard and I've got a moment, I'll be responding to a few clients on my phone. So I have to be flexible with it. And I've had to set things up in a way that actually works for this season of life.
Can you talk a little bit more about the logistics of that? What are some things that you put in place that allowed you to have that flexibility? So I heard you say you hired someone while you're on maternity leave to kind of dive in and support you. What are some other things that helped you out?
Yeah, so I have a VA in the business as well. So a lot of the logistical sides of things or the admin side of things, uploading replays, sending out my weekly email, which gives everyone an update of what's going on, all of those things that get scheduled. We have very good systems and processes, especially after, like, I've been running this program now for 6 years. So yes, it's evolved, but I've got a lot of stuff in place that, is all automated or is at least schedulable. Is that a word? Um, so my VA does a lot of that work for me. And, a lot of the work I do on my phone some days will be like, hey, can you get that sorted for me so that we can kind of get that up and running? And so she's also been working with me for 5 years too. So having that kind of long-term support, someone who really understands the business, is really, really powerful. The biggest amount of work I think that probably I do outside of client work is the marketing and content and sales side of things. And I do have support with that as well. So I've got a content manager who supports me with a lot of writing and creating sales pages and sign up pages and things like that. So she does some work for me as well. And a lot of that, again, will be me reviewing her stuff that she's done. And then I hand that over to my VA to then go and set it all up. So I'm not doing all of this on my own, and I wouldn't be able to run the business that I've got in this way if I didn't have that support as well. So logistically, it looks like having people who can help me with that. And the VA was with me as well through that maternity leave too. So she did basically all of the running of the business behind the scenes, and the support coach did all of the supporting of my clients.
So when did you decide that you actually needed help for the first time? Was it when you were going on maternity leave that you're like, okay, I need support now? And what did that look like? What were the mindset shifts that happened for you when you decided to bring somebody on? Because I know for a lot of people, your business is your baby and they can have a hard time letting go of certain things. So I'm curious of what that looked like for you.
Yeah, this is a great question. So the first hire that I made is actually my content manager now. So she worked for me and she came on board in that first year. after I had my baby. So we're going back now 6 years. So when I was starting to put all of these programs together, actually, I remember exactly when it was. So it was right when I launched that 3-week Move Your Business Online program. And I remember because I wasn't planning on doing that. If you recall, or if it was similar for you, when COVID happened, I feel like it happened very quickly and the world kind of shut down and everyone kind of went, oh my goodness. So I put this program together quite quickly. And it was at that point that I had brought her on and I wasn't actually planning on doing that launch, but she came on board and I was like, hey, we're launching a program like tomorrow. And I don't have anything ready yet.
Surprise.
I'm surprised. I wouldn't recommend hiring in that way. I would really not recommend that. So I'd already decided, because at that point I was running my first 6-month program at that point, and I brought in some money to the business. And so I was in this position where I was like, okay, if I want to grow this further, I know that I'm going to need someone to help me with the ongoing management of this thing, because when you do run online programs, there's a lot of moving parts that have to happen. And yes, you can automate a lot and you can schedule a lot, but as somebody who didn't have a lot of time with a small baby, I needed someone to help me with that. And that was the easiest thing as well to kind of offload, because it was like, well, I can put those processes in place. We can map out exactly what all of that looks like, and then somebody else can help me automate all of it. So that's the decision that I made at that point. And I think if anybody is hiring for the first time, that's what I would really recommend. Like, I would look at what are those repeatable tasks that you do in your business consistently, and is there a way that you can kind of offload some of that stuff that feels a little bit easier to offload in the beginning. Now I'm great at delegating, but back then it was like, okay, let's start small here. And for me, the biggest thing was a lot of my processes at that time lived in my head. I didn't have anything that I could really hand over. So I said to her when she came on board, I was like, one of the things that I really want to do is like start documenting what this looks like. So that first launch we did actually was really great, because she then went through and documented the whole process that we could then rinse and repeat every time we were launching something. And so that was the beginning of me setting up all of the processes and things that we now use in the business, like all the time. But it was really helpful. And that's one of the things that I really wanted her to come on board and help me with initially. So that was the moment for me. And then as that relationship developed and also her business developed and what she was doing, she very quickly started doing a lot of my content writing and copywriting and supporting me with a lot of that. And so her role naturally changed. And then we did a big revision of what that would look like. And so then I decided to bring on a VA that would do a lot of the admin side of things. And then she would stay and support me with a lot of that copywriting. And for me, that was the thing that took so much time, was if I was launching, to write all of my launch emails, to put a sales page together. That stuff is the stuff that I would bottleneck because I didn't have the time to sit down and write all of it. And then she would be like, well, we're launching, Bec, you haven't written your launch emails. So when you start delegating and then start realizing, okay, where are you bottlenecking things? That can be what really the moment in time where you're like, I either need to free up more time over here somewhere, or I need to outsource this thing that I've got.
And it sounds like at this point too, everything's kind of like a well-oiled machine. She's been with you for a while now. She probably knows your business in and out at this point. So she can talk as if she's you and be able to position your brand appropriately, right?
Yeah. And I think we've got such a good working relationship too, that, you know, every launch we have a conversation, basically the same conversation, where she'll say, okay, like, where are your people at right now? What's going on for them? And we will have a conversation and we'll talk about the messaging points and the key things that are coming up and what are the biggest things and biggest challenges and all of those things, which do change slightly, but are often very similar things. And she then takes that, creates the messaging, updates what it is that we're talking about. But yeah, it's this evolution. And because we've been working together for so long, we've evolved my business together, really. And I feel very grateful to have two women who support me in the business who have been around now for 5+ years.
That's amazing.
Mm.
So, in closing, if someone listening feels like they don't have enough time, enough resources, or enough capacity to build the business that they want, what is something that you would tell them or want them to know?
Mm. So the first thing I would say is don't be afraid to get that support in and ask for help. And I think there's two things that come up there. It's actually not liking asking for help. I think a lot of women, if they're listening to this, like women don't necessarily love asking for help. We want to be able to do things ourselves. I know that was the case for me. And as you said before, it's like your business is your baby and like you don't want to let go of some things. But I think if you currently don't have the time or the capacity to do that, and you have a really big vision for your business, you are going to at some point need that support. And if you are willing to take the time to hand that over to someone and to find that person who can hold that with you, I think is really powerful. And I say, don't be afraid to do that and to invest time. And I've talked about my team who have been with me for 5+ years. I have had people who have come and gone in that time as well, who were wonderful and great as well, but they just weren't that fit for me in that long-term way. And so it might take a little bit of time, and that's also okay. You're not doing anything wrong in that if you take a little bit of time to find that support. But I think don't be afraid to ask for that help and outsource, and you do get better at that delegation. And actually at some point you probably get too good at that delegation where it's like, I don't even know how certain things in my business run anymore because I've got someone who handles that for me. And that feels kind of wild, but also kind of freeing, because it means that you do really trust someone to do that. And that doesn't necessarily happen straight away, but it would take time. The other thing I would say is don't do what I did and throw someone in the deep end. I would kind of give yourself some time and space to actually build that relationship and get someone in to support you in the long term, but in a way that kind of eases them in and you can bring them on board and have some processes and systems in place if possible beforehand.
So don't have it all in your head, have it mapped out.
Oh, like honestly, I remember when I took it all out of my brain and put it somewhere, it was like this moment that suddenly the fog lifted and I did not realize how much I was carrying in my brain and trying to remember, because anybody who's launched before, if you've launched without having a plan, it literally sits in your head, and in the middle of the night you'll wake up and be like, oh my goodness, I didn't send that email. Oh my goodness, I didn't turn on that button in the back end of my email marketing or whatever to make sure it does this thing. You just have these moments. That is not a way to run a good business. So even if you're not outsourcing, automate as much as you can. Bring that plan out of your brain, put it somewhere there's so many project management tools these days, and then automate, if you can, some of those steps so that they're not as hard. Create some templates for yourself. Write the email once, not 75 times. There's so many things you can do that will save you time.
Well, Bec, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your journey so openly. One of the things I love most about your story is that it challenges the belief that growth only comes from doing more. So you've shown that sometimes growth comes from getting clearer and simplifying and building a business that supports the life you want to live. So for anyone listening who wants to connect with Bec, I'll make sure to have all of her information in the show notes. And Bec, thank you again for joining me on the Six Figure Plus Club. It's been such a pleasure having you.
Thanks so much for having me.